Friends, at this time, we are going to begin services for Dr. Barry M. Chapnick. Officiating our services today is Dr. Mark Slutsky and also Cantor David Landau from Eitz Chaim Center for Jewish Living.
When I just heard that announcement, I got a little worried because as soon as I heard the phrase, the services would begin, I immediately thought of what Barry would have done. And it wasn't going to be to sit around and listen. We're here. What? Oh, when the announcement was made that services were about to begin, I knew exactly what Barry would do, and it wasn't going to be to sit here. But we are here. We're here because each of us, as a wife, as children, as nieces and nephews, as great nieces and nephews, as cousins, as a brother, sister-in-law, and as friends, we are here because the world in which Barry played a part, the world of each of us in which Barry was so integral, has been shattered. And we come together today to try to rebuild for his family and really for each of us what he meant to us and continue to incorporate him into our lives as we go forward, knowing forever how we've been influenced and experience our interactions with him. In that way, we really honor him, and in that way, we live with the value of life that was so central to him. If you think about Barry's career, he studied how the body recovered from trauma. He studied how the chemicals within the body worked so that when we were stressed and when we suffered, we had the ability to come back, to become resolved, to function again. And that quality of his work was what was so much of the interaction and presence that was part of his life. He was amazingly calm and witty and thoughtful and engaging. He took everything that he discussed seriously without taking the conversation too seriously. In a world of people that could debate anything, Barry was always that calm voice who made a sensible, thoughtful comment that put not only it, but us in our perspective. That quality defined him to me. Traditionally, there are psalms that are said. And I found a psalm written by Mike Reese, who is the author of who is the writer of The Simpsons. And let me say what he wrote about life. He said, "I'm not a spiritual man. I don't believe in ghosts or astrology or reincarnation. Although I'm Jewish, I happily eat a ham sandwich with mayo in a synagogue on Yom Kippur. My one supernatural belief, if you work hard enough, you can find the right joke for every situation. If you work hard enough, you can find the perspective to sustain yourself, to live, to have humor, and to go ahead." And that quality define Barry. Personally, I best got to know Barry when he and Judy came to Chicago and came to Eitz Chaim, our synagogue. And Barry and Judy would arrive, and Judy would come in, and Barry would sit outside, either reading books from the library or gathering some friends who shared with him the desire to be there without being there. And conversations would continue. And then at a certain point, Barry would venture into the room. And I would look at my watch, and I'd know it meant one thing. Slutsky, you guys have been going on too long, because at Eitz Chaim we can go on forever over anything. And I'd look at him, and he'd smile, and I'd wrap it up, and then we'd sit down for lunch, and Barry would be the most active participant at every level of conversation, whether it was science or politics or food. And he was a gourmet. How many people can really, with eloquence, describe the difference between a Poochie's and a Wolfie's? And that quality of Barry is what drew us all to him. The traditional psalm is relevant also because it says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, my supports are with me. And for Barry, as I said, his work was to study how we support ourselves. But Barry wasn't in this alone. Barry was able to draw on the strengths and the interests and the abilities of the people around him. So whether it was facing the struggles of life, the challenges of life, the developments of life, or whether it was facing this horrible, terrible, devastating illness, Barry drew on his own strengths. He drew on his body's strengths. He drew on his psychological strengths. And he drew on the strengths of the people who are connected to him. So though he walked through the valley of the shadow of death, he feared no evil. That psalm, I think Barry would appreciate, because if there's anything that Barry was capable of doing, and he did it so well, and I enjoyed it so much, was that he could change the perspective from which you are looking at something to give it a different perspective, a different frame, so that he could be involved in a conversation. And no matter how locked people were in going back and forth in the same way, he would find another axis, another approach, another way of thinking that somehow didn't just bring people together, but gave them a chance to think differently themselves. And today, we will hear stories. At the Shiva, we will hear and share more stories. And in the months and years ahead, we'll retell ourselves stories of our experiences with Barry. And in doing that, we do the work and the process that coming here today is about for all of us. David, the 23rd Psalm.
Adonai roi lo achsar pinateshe yabitzeni amei menuchot inachaleni nafshi yishovev yancheni v'magale tzedek leman shemo gam ki elech Begeit Salmavet, לא יירא הרע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך, המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צוררי, תשענת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
We honor and comfort ourselves with the stories we tell, with the memories we share. So we'll begin with his niece Liz.
Hi, everyone. Those of you that knew my Uncle Barry know that one thing, among many things that he truly loved, was sitting down for a chat with a fine bottle of wine. As I sat and thought about what I was going to say today, I started to think about how much Uncle Barry actually had in common with a fine bottle of wine. It sounds crazy, but stay with me. Fine wine is often described as wine that comes from a specific identifiable place and has a long-standing reputation for high quality. Wine that comes from a specific identifiable place. I wasn't born yet when Uncle Barry first lived in Chicago, but I do have one vivid memory of visiting Aunt Judy and Uncle Barry in their home in New Orleans, and even more fond memories of the house in St. Louis as we visited there frequently. Uncle Barry always welcomed everyone into his home. He and Aunt Judy loved when anybody came to visit. Their love of family and friends always shone through, and even as a young girl, I knew how much it meant to them when I would come and visit. It wasn't until Aunt Judy and Uncle Barry moved back to their home of Chicago, however, their hometown, that I got to know them even better. And it wasn't just about proximity. Perhaps it was because I was older and less restless, but to me, the best times were spent handing Uncle Barry a glass of wine and sitting down in the family room just to talk. I never did learn to appreciate the wine part of the conversation, but I certainly appreciated the friendly banter, sometimes disagreements, and always good discussions that came out of it. And honestly, watching Uncle Barry have one of his chats with my husband, Ronan, made me love them both even more. The two of them could talk for hours on end. On more than one occasion, I found myself asking Ronan, "Where were you?" And the answer was always the same, talking to Uncle Barry. Fine wine has a long-standing reputation for high quality. Like the finest of wines, every single person that you talk to about Uncle Barry will say that he was high quality. With his quiet demeanor, Uncle Barry evoked a sense of warmth, comfort, and familiarity. He had opinions, and he wasn't afraid to share them, but Uncle Barry was also a phenomenal listener. I mean, he really, really listened. Much like the layers of flavor in fine wine, Uncle Barry had many dimensions to his personality. He was bold yet subtle, strong yet gentle, and always left an impression on those that were fortunate enough to know him. Uncle Barry laughed with his whole body. It didn't happen all the time, but when he found something funny, his shoulders shook, and his smile grew, and his laugh became infectious. Fine wine is made with passion and attentiveness. Uncle Barry's passion for Aunt Judy and his love for his children, Michael and Dana, his daughter-in-law Vanessa, his family and friends knew no bounds. My own children, his great-nephew and nieces, became pseudo-grandchildren to him. He went to their plays, their birthday parties, their shows, always with a proud smile on his face, and even trekked all the way to Israel for Tal's bar mitzvah on Masada. Attentiveness, that one's easy. I literally cannot picture a time where Uncle Barry was leaving my house and he didn't turn back to grab Aunt Judy's hand and make sure that she was okay. Fine wines are found all over the world, and at any given time, Uncle Barry and Aunt Judy could be found all over the world. Singapore, San Diego, Vietnam, Thailand, all over Europe, Portugal. I actually can't remember a time where I was planning a trip and I didn't hear one of them say, "We went there. It was amazing. Let me give you some restaurants." Speaking of restaurants, how many times did I see a photograph with Uncle Barry and Aunt Judy with a chef or an owner or a sommelier or someone from a restaurant in some town in some foreign country somewhere? They made friends everywhere they went because they saw the beauty in the fine dining, the fine wine, and the fine people. But at the same time, the dining didn't have to be 5-star. We all know how much Poochie's meant to Uncle Barry. 5 stars in our book. Everyone remember COVID? Some of the best memories I have of Uncle Barry are when he would stop at Poochie's on the way to our house, and we'd eat in our backyard, safely social distanced, so we could catch up. I'm not sure which was the bigger draw, coming to see us or getting to stop at Poochie's on the way. In the tapestry of life, Uncle Barry was a rare and precious vintage, a true testament to the beauty of aging with grace and dignity. And at some point over the next week, month, year, I want you to think about Uncle Barry, remember his life and his legacy, and raise your own glass in honor of his life well lived. Uncle Barry's legacy will endure like the finest of wines, forever cherished and never forgotten.
Daphne and Sivan.
Today, I am filled with multiple different emotions. There's sadness and grief, of course, at the passing of my Uncle Barry, but also a deep sense of gratitude for having such an incredible man in my life. He was my uncle, yes, but he was so much more than that. He was a mentor, a friend for my siblings and I, and a person who brought many people joy. His influence has left an incredible mark on us, and for that, we are forever grateful. To me, Uncle Barry was one of my rocks, whether it was gathering around the fireplace outside to see each other during COVID, or going out at lunch to the Cheesecake Factory. He taught me the value of family and the importance of laughter. Uncle Barry had a remarkable ability to make people feel seen and heard. He'd often talk to me during family gatherings to catch up, genuinely interested in whatever was happening with me. These conversations weren't always so complex. They were just something as simple as, "Hey Doff, how are you?" It may not have seemed like a lot, but it left me feeling loved and cared for. That was who he was. There was nobody funnier or more quick-witted than my Uncle Barry. He was so empathetic and never failed to surprise people with his teasing sense of humor. But he was also incredibly warm and kind. I'll never forget how my siblings and I all used to argue over whose turn it was to have their personal sleepover at his house. The cries and fits I threw because it wasn't my turn, but when it finally came, I didn't want to leave. He made every moment enjoyable. He loved to chat and travel and brought happiness and joyfulness into life. His love for his family was such a gift, something that we, as well as everyone around him, were able to witness every day. We love you, Uncle Barry. Thank you for everything.
I remember my first sleepover at Aunt Judy and Uncle Barry's house. Uncle Barry took me to the art museum in the city. While it's no secret that no one in my family is particularly fond of museums, the simple thought of spending the day with him sold me instantly. The entire time we were laughing and smiling. Although it was several years ago, and I don't remember much from that day, I do remember the overwhelming feeling of joy I felt. It was like this any time I was with Uncle Barry. As soon as he walked into the room, he had a smile on his face and came to give me a big hug. He always gave the best hugs. Aunt Judy and Uncle Barry loved to travel. It seemed like every time I asked, they were off to a new place and a new adventure, and they passed that love of travel on to me. They also made sure that no matter where I go, I'll always be prepared. Every suitcase I've ever owned has been a gift from them. And when I travel to new places, I will look at my suitcase and know that Uncle Barry will be with me wherever I go. During family gatherings, Uncle Barry was always the first to laugh at my jokes. He never minded my dark, twisted sense of humor. In fact, half the time he would respond with something that was even more dark and even more twisted. He was always willing to listen to me, whatever craziness was going on in my life, and never failed to show up to all my ice shows, all my plays, and all my performances. Looking back on all my moments with Uncle Barry, I'm filled with an overwhelming feeling of gratitude. Words cannot express how grateful I am to have had someone like him in my life. I'm grateful for the memories we shared, the experiences we've had, and the incredible feeling of love I felt whenever he was around. My Uncle Barry taught me the most important things in life. Laugh hard, smile big, hug tight, just like he did.
Russell?
Thank you. I'm going to start by breaking 2 rules of giving these speeches. I have nothing prepared. I have no notes. Sorry about that. And I'm supposed to be funny, and as a Shapiro, it is my birthright. But I'm not feeling a lot of funny things. But I will keep it quick because, you know, I think like all of us, I'm swirling with stories and memories. And there's a lot that I want to say to Uncle Barry and not necessarily to anybody else. And I'm going to keep that in my heart. But beautiful speeches we just heard. And a word came up, which was going to be the one thing I wanted to talk about rather than focus on details, is that's the whole mentorship thing. I'm also a nephew of Uncle Barry and also a scientist. And people think that's where the mentorship part comes in because he is a mentor. And I hope particularly, you know, younger folks out here that you have lots of different mentors in your life. It is just so very, very important. And he was my mentor as a scientist. I didn't get it from anybody else. But more importantly, I think more importantly is what Aunt Judy and Uncle Barry have been to me, and I think I can speak for Heather, as mentors of just getting through life, of living life, grasping it, which we've heard, which you all know about. But particularly after the last talk, I think the thing that I'm going to get most out of his mentorship is listening. You know, one thing you don't hear about is the way he talked about himself. And I thought about this on the plane over, is here's somebody who is so accomplished, so amazingly accomplished. I remember as a kid going in and seeing his lab and the work he was doing, and he never talked about himself, and he never had to make himself bigger than anybody else. He was a listener, and I hope, in addition to living the memories, I hope I live up to his mentorship of just listening and making people feel heard, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
His good friend, David Ginsburg.
So, you know, Dale and Judy and David Miller and I, we all go back to high school together. Barry was sort of a late arrival. And then he was traveling around so much, I really didn't know where he was most of the time. But when he moved back to Chicago, he wound up moving in half a mile from our place. Actually, right up the same street. We both lived on Delaware. It's easy to find him. And so Barry And Judy and David and Bonnie and Dale and I would go out to theater and out to dinner and New Year's Eve, so celebrated New Year's Eve together. Eventually, Barry became my cycling buddy. We'd ride up and down the lakefront from Hollywood to the old South Shore Country Club. Excuse me. We couldn't go further south than South Shore Country Club because Judy was certain that the environment further south was too dangerous for us. So just to give you some idea about what the relationship was like amongst us, and Judy, this is a confession. I told Barry, why don't we just keep riding and we don't have to tell Judy about it. And but it didn't work. Barry said he could not lie to you, even about bicycling. So the only disappointment I think Barry ever gave me. When I stopped cycling, Barry became my walking buddy. And since we both lived on Delaware, he'd head out going west, I'd be going east. And when I saw that shock of white hair and that smile, I thought, okay, we hooked up. And we would walk north towards Lincoln Park. Sometimes we'd walk past the mansions on Astor and State. Sometimes we'd walk along the lake shore and the sand and the sea. But we'd never stop talking. We had a lot of conversations. We would talk about, typical guy stuff like, the pharmacology of leukotrienes or prostaglandins, or how Barry learned how to cut rabbit aortas into little spirals. Just the usual kind of guy conversations. To explain what kind of a special relationship we had, I want you to know we actually both enjoyed those conversations. I can't have those conversations with anybody else except I've got a brother who's, thank you, similarly inclined. But without a doubt, our most meaningful conversations revolved around family, both his and mine. When I was ventilating, Barry would listen thoughtfully, really paying attention to whatever was going on in my life. And by the way, that continued up until his last days. I was shocked. I was sitting there visiting him. He was struggling with this awful disease, and he was asking me about how I was feeling. Barry was always generous with empathy, with understanding, and he was always either too humble or too wise or both to try to offer any advice. It's funny, listening to what others have said about him. You always wonder if you're seeing the same man that other people are seeing, same guy. So his memory will be a blessing for all of us.
This morning, before I came here, I was really privileged to hear a recording that Michael had made of a conversation with Barry not so long ago when he reviewed his life, when he shared stories of his life from when he was a child through the development of his career and through his families. And as David said, there was one Barry, but that Barry was always multi-layered. That Barry always had so many perspectives. There was one incident that struck me. He told the story of his father's store and was asked about whether there was a robbery. And he described the scene of the robbery. And what he said is, the robber came in and Michael said, "What did your father do?" And he said he, first of all, calmed the robber down. He protected us in the back of the room. We were worried. When it was all settled, he came back and brought us out. And then I heard stories of Barry's career. And as was said, there was a humility in the midst of all of his accomplishments. And he said something else that's a lesson for this world today. And that is, he said, when he played sports and when he did different activities, he had one motivation: to have fun. He had the motivation that the experience was for enjoyment, not to get a trophy or to win. In fact, he said he didn't even care who won, but what mattered to him was the way you related to people, the way you respected yourself without being arrogant, and the way that you embraced the needs of others, even as you were aware of your own needs. There are some people, at the moment of losing them, you wonder, how will I relate to them? How will they remember them? The first conversation I had with Judy after Barry died was, I'm already thinking of what the Shiva will be like and how many different stories we'll have, and even for all I know, I'll learn more and share more. Just think of this one example. Their travel was alluded to many times already, and yet Barry and Judy never reported a trip like anybody else did. It was never their version of photos. It was, they never just traveled anywhere, they lived there. They lived there because they met the people, they experienced it, they embraced it, they saw the cultures on their own terms, and they wanted to go back because they connected to everything they experienced. And now we're at that moment of transition where our connection with Barry is different. Because in his life, Barry was a leader in his quiet way. He was active in his quiet way, and he took responsibility in a very definitely committed way. And now that relationship that each of us had with him in different ways is changing. Now, in a sense, we're the active player who takes responsibility for Barry's existence. The example I use is if any of you saw the movie Coco. And in the movie Coco, they say everybody really lives twice. Once when you're active and participating in the world on your own. And the second is when you're remembered, when you exist in the thoughts, in the stories, in the memories, and in the behavior of other people. This is that transition moment when we're coming to take responsibility for Barry's continued good deeds, for Barry's continued life, for Barry's continuing to be with us. And not surprisingly, if you get past just the words, but to the essence of it, the only prayer that's in the Jewish liturgy is the El Mole Rachamim prayer, which says, now that a person can no longer act on their own, we commit to continue to do the deeds, to live the life, to accomplish the goals that sustain him and his memory. So please, let's rise for the El Mole Rachamim prayer.
El Malay Rachamim שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, על כנפי השכינה, ממעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמות ברל בן ראובן מרדכי וחיילי שהלך לעולמו. בעבור שבלי נדר ניתן צדקה, ונעשה צדקה, ביד הזכרת נשמתו בגן עדן, בגן עדן נהי מנוחתו. לכן בעל הרחמים, בעל הרחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
Friends, this concludes this portion of the service. The interment will continue at West Lawn Cemetery in Norwich. Upon return from the cemetery today, the family will be together at the Elizabeth and Ronan Belkind residence. That's 111 16th Street in Wilmette. That's again today, following the interment until 5 p.m., Saturday from 6:30 p.m. to 9 p.m., and also Sunday and Monday from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., and again on Sunday and Monday from 6:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. That information, as well as information regarding the Shiva coordinator, is available on our website for those of you who have joined us via the live stream. And for those of you who are here with us today, it's also available on the service folders you received as you arrived. If you did not receive a folder, they will be made available as you depart. For those of you joining us in procession to the cemetery, we'll ask you to please keep a few safety measures in mind, especially considering the weather. Please make sure that your bright headlights and your hazard lights are on at all times in the procession, and please follow the car in front of you as closely as safety permits to avoid any gaps in the procession, particularly as we make our way through intersections. We'll ask you to obtain an orange funeral safety sticker that our staff will have available for you. That goes in the front side of your passenger, or the passenger side of your front windshield. And also, please make a note not to speak on your phones or text on your phones while you're driving in procession as well. The following have been asked to act as pallbearers today. As I say your name, I'll ask you to please step forward. David Shapiro, Russell Shapiro, Mindy Shapiro, Jerry Mulinchik, Stephanie Frantic, Dan Weisberg, Beth Weisberg-Rosenthal, Elizabeth Miller-Belkind, Lauren Miller, and Brian Miller. I'll ask you to please step forward at this time, and everyone, if you would please rise as we escort the family, the casket, and the clergy from the chapel.